We're just scrutinizing your minutes, Julian.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Every minute taker's nightmare.
Julian, you missed introductions for Sonia's sake. Sonia Masterson is
Hi, Sonia.
Julian Portillo.
Fellow former Winooskiite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I moved here from Winooski as well.
Have we seen each other?
I don't know.
So
Maybe-
do we
maybe in
have a
the circle.
motion to approve minutes from our March meeting? I would do it. Here's it's supposed to. Yeah, normally a chair wouldn't make a motion, but this is non-controversial evidently. So I'll move to approve minutes of March absent any other, but we need a seconder.
I'll second.
And thanks, super. So any discussion of the motion? All in favor?
Aye. Chase,
Any
you're the
opposed?
timekeeper, right?
Aye.
Oh,
Oh, there's Cecilia.
oh,
Hi, Cecilia.
welcome, Cecilia. Thanks for joining online.
Hi.
We've been doing introductions. Let's just complete this motion. We're still looking for any opposed to the motion to approve minutes. Evidently not, so the minutes are approved. So let's just add Cecilia Danks to the as a member of this committee as our introductions. We've been introducing ourselves to Sonia Masterson, who's present, an applicant for a forthcoming vacancy. So Cecilia meet Sonia, Sonia meet Cecilia.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you. I've been on this committee a while. I don't know what else I should add to the introductions. We're just doing names or,
Just, yeah, we were just doing names.
okay, great. Thanks. Thank you, Sonia.
A while is an understatement. So today's agenda then. Okay. Additions, changes, anyone? Okay. Sounds like none. Anything new at Conservation Commission?
Not so much, not that as it pertains to this committee,
Mhm.
aside from just reminding folks here that at some point, some members of RCC would love to weigh in on the management plan. I know that we're under a deadline for getting something to the select board, so it seems unlikely that will happen before they look at this current, whatever version we have to present to the select board, but
Oh, yeah.
I will just remind folks that, yeah, they had expressed, waiting for us to solicit feedback from them.
Mhm.
And they would like to weigh in at some point.
Yeah. Okay.
Aside from that, I got nothing.
Would like to weigh in on the
The management plan.
management plan.
Yeah.
Once we get to that point.
Trails, oh, sorry, Melissa.
Would like to suggest that when the management plan on May 22nd is ready to go to the select board, that perhaps a draft copy could also go to the RCC and the RTC at that time as well.
Seems reasonable.
Would that, would the Conservation Commission come to that meeting and raise issues in front of the select board?
I don't think so.
That would be bad. That would be a bummer, right? If they were like, we have a
No,
problem with.
we would be asking initially for a written comments from them and invite them to a later meeting probably, right?
I would
We
agree.
don't think we would invite them to come solicit feedback at the select board meeting.
But once it, so once it goes to the select board, it's not like they approve it and we're done.
Well, I mean,
This
we
is,
might get into it in a few minutes when we get to the agenda item, but I mean, this all arose out of our question to the select board in the first place about management plan versus trails and, whether or not we should do them in tandem or, separately. So their response to our question was kind of asking us to do a check-in, right? So my understanding is that the select board wasn't saying on June 2nd, you need to have the management plan 100% complete and ready for us to stamp it and, approve it. And this is what's going to be, the law of the land. Essentially, it's we want to see your work because it's been a while. And so it's kind of more of a hustle to get something to us so we can see where you're at with this, and not necessarily once you hit this date, that's the end. Adam
okay.
Wood had even mentioned that, if it took a year, that wouldn't be his preference, but it was still, they indicated that it was flexible, and ideally it would be on the sooner end. But that it's not a hard deadline of you need to have the management plan done by June. But I think, we owe it to ourselves and to the select board to try to get as finished a product as we can, or at least organize what we have as much as possible by that date, so that they can look at it and see like a good progress report.
So because I thought we were trying to have a management plan by then, sort of the way.
I mean, we
I've been
are,
hearing
but
it,
we also have less than 5 hours of meeting time between now and then. And based on where the management plan is currently at and where a lot of us would like it to be, I don't think that's a reasonable assumption, is that we can have the management plan completely polished and complete. Especially because we are bound by open meeting law, and that seems to trip us up often, where we get less work done outside of meetings than we'd like, because, it seems like when we're collaborating in that capacity, it ends up, being a potential violation. So most of the actual setting in stone of some of the stuff happens in the meeting. So we got to go through everything before we can sort of approve it and send it along.
Okay, so you feel like it's not realistic in the next, is it 2 meetings today and the next one?
Yes.
To have a polished, finished management plan?
I don't think so personally, but I guess we'll see. I mean, I would love to see us get there.
Well,
But
I think
I think-
having that goal in mind is a lot different than saying, yeah, we'll just do the best we can, and, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say polished, finished as like a definition is a hard, what do you call it, bar to reach, like if we're looking at something that we can work with, there'll always be things to change in it. But finding a spot that we're comfortable with, that the select board can approve it at different points, right? I don't know, the select board didn't say, we want the end all product that will be set in stone.
They weren't asking for something so that they could approve. They were asking for something to look at.
Yes.
Progress report, I think is the term.
Yeah.
Could I suggest we take this off the current discussion of the Conservation Commission, because it's really a wider issue when we get to reviewing the management plan and
Yeah.
also determining our agenda for our May meeting.
Okay.
But I think just a observation is that when this management plan draft form goes to the select board, then it would be in their packet and therefore publicly available in advance of their meeting. So members of the public and members of other committees are able to, and welcome to look at it. Could we, is that reasonable then to revisit this, maybe this question of the management plan when we get to that?
Yeah,
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, for sure.
everybody.
Nothing
So
from
trails?
trails met outside. And I also wasn't at the meeting, but they just did trail work on River Shore.
Picking your fiddleheads.
Picking up nails. All right,
Public comment, and is that, are we there?
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And we have a member of the public, it's a good friend of the committee, but technically member of the public, so this would be a good time, Dan, if you have comments.
No, at this time, thank you. Okay. Excellent.
Good, thanks.
Time wise, we're a little over for
Okay,
next item.
all right, yeah, we get the trains moving. About 6 minutes over, okay. So Sonia was
Well, maybe we could just introduce this by, we have 3 imminent vacancies on this committee because of terms being of 3-year term. And at this point, we have, as of June 1st, there'll be 3 vacancies. We hope that Select Board will make an appointment with our recommendation. At this point, we have an applicant present from outside the committee for one of those spots. The 3 vacancies, just for the record, 2 are sort of at-large members of this committee and 1 is assigned to the Trails Committee. So there are actually, at this point, 2 positions that Sonia Masterson might be eligible for. One of the retiring positions is Cecilia, and maybe Cecilia, you could comment, because I understand you were looking into the issue of whether or not to reapply at this point.
What's going on with my camera here? Okay, so yeah, I've been extremely swamped this semester and missed the original deadline to reapply. But then Duncan said because there was only 1 applicant, there's no reason why I still couldn't apply to be reviewed by you all in the select board. So I was kind of trying to get through the semester before I made a final decision about reapplying, and also to see if there were other folks who wanted to join the committee. So I'm open to staying on, but if there are other other voices and skills and energy that might want to join the committee, I'm also open to making room for that. So that's where we stand. I guess I'll check in with Duncan again when the next deadline by which the select board has to review things. But it goes to you guys first and then the select board, is that right? So maybe it has to be before the next meeting of our committee.
Yeah, and of course the deadline for applications was earlier this month.
Yeah, but he said if we don't have enough people applying, then it's sort of open until filled.
Yeah, if we have vacancies as of June 1st, then there are what would we call them, interim appointments would be possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's helpful. Thanks, Clara, for clarifying that. So
I think you should sign up again.
That's good. Then the application from Sonia Masterson is in the packet, and so we've seen that application. So as normal, as we usually do in this committee, this is an opportunity to ask the applicant, who's fortunately present at the meeting, for any elaboration of points that have been raised in the application. So maybe start by questions from the committee, and then maybe also questions from the applicant, Sonia Masterson, about what you might be letting yourself in for. Is that good? Right, start with.
I think so, yeah.
Questions about the application from the committee.
Sure.
Or do you want to give us a little bit of background? I mean, I see what's in the packet, but if you want to just sort of reintroduce yourself and I guess why you're excited or interested in joining the committee.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I think Sam.
I do have one quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
That is, if I understood that there were vacancies, but are they currently filled by people who would like to be reappointed? All 3
Doesn't
positions.
appear so. I mean,
No, I don't think so. I think Melissa and I are timing out.
But you could be reappointed.
no one has, you're the only one who's
Not
applied.
unless we reapply.
So we have 3 open seats coming up and 1 application thus far. And there are essentially 2 of those are just regular seats, which are not affiliated with any specific other body in Richmond. But then one of the seats, Chase's seat, is the Richmond Trails Committee representative. So whoever applies for that seat has to be on that committee. But right now, to answer your question, you're the only applicant for the 3 open seats. So And Cecilia may apply, yeah, as well.
Two
She might,
eligible.
because she's not a member of the Trails Committee.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a brand new resident. I'm just moving from Winooski, and before that was in New Hampshire for several years. And my new residence abuts the Andrews community property, and I just think it's such a great idea to have not necessarily a park with a like we have down by the river, but just an open space. that can be
If I
applied
could just
to it.
interrupt, because of the way we run the meeting with the video, could we move you to the table? I mean, we'd love to have you a bit closer anyway, and then you'll be on the video, and probably the sound will be better if we can find
Certainly.
a chair for you.
Mics may not work back there.
There's one here.
I bet it's catching me because there's mics all over.
Oh, yeah.
It usually does.
Yeah.
When people speak from there, you can hear them.
I'm no stranger to town government. I was on the village board for Gales Ferry in Connecticut for years and years and years, secretary, president, vice president. And it was highly contentious. One does not shy away from such things. One defends the Constitution, if so to speak. And it's been a long time, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it.
Great.
Yeah, you get a break and you come back in and you defend the Constitution some more, right? Yeah. Any questions?
Excellent.
Have you had a chance to walk the trails as they currently are in these community parks?
This is the second day where it's been above, I think, 60. So not really yet, because of the snow and the mud and the ice, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I did the meadow walk many times, but I'm not up into the fields quite yet. Yeah,
Have you met the chicks yet?
the chicks.
Ticks, yeah.
Oh, the ticks.
It's
Oh,
notorious
oh,
for that.
yeah.
Cute.
I
Shove.
had a farm in Connecticut, and that was my best bumper crop every single year. Yeah, yeah.
Possums got.
It's
Andrews Forest
Lots of
has Andrews Forest has a reputation for ticks.
noted. Yeah,
Mhm.
deer ticks are mostly wood ticks
Deer ticks mostly.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're-
Mostly.
Mostly deer ticks, yeah. There are some
Wow.
wood ticks, but yeah, I'd say I see probably 50 plus deer ticks for every one wood tick.
Is it would take a dog tick?
Yeah,
That's simple.
It's the
the bigger
big
one.
fat.
Big one?
Yeah.
Fat ones? Yeah, right.
All right, so can we take, sort of like a dog and a cat can take, the pills? Can we take the pills? Because
We're getting there.
Not yet.
They're working on stuff like that, but
We need the
I don't
collars.
think we have anything like that yet.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I just looked you up, or I looked up 1147 East Main. So you're actually in the old Andrews farmhouse, is that correct?
Oh, cool.
That is so awesome.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
really
I'm
enjoying
I'm glad you're up for being on the committee because you're sort of whether you want it or not,
Yeah.
sort of a gateway place for it.
Back to,
Let's just say, for better or for worse, I can see who's coming and going.
I think that's great.
Kind of neat that you're applying because I do remember way back when that some documents said we wanted to recruit whoever lived on the property to be
Really?
on the committee. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Do you remember
Yes.
this?
It was in the original management plan. Well, we didn't necessarily have to be people who lived in that house, but adjacent landowners was considered, a stakeholder group that we wanted to make sure we included if possible.
Stakeholder's a good term.
Stake-
Yeah, good term.
yeah.
Kind of got all sides. If we have you, we'll have all sides. We've got the, Route 2 side, we've got right on the other side. I'm a few properties over, but I'm on the on the west side, so kind of got representatives surrounding the forest.
Like sentries all around.
Locked it up.
Brilliant.
Ed, when you were in your previous roles in local government, did you ever have to work on any management plans?
management plans. In some ways, all it was management plans. That sounds ridiculous. In some ways, all it was. But what I understand to be management plans is sustaining the status quo with an ever-changing set of circumstances and factors surrounding it. The town, what's available, who's using the property, what the property is being used for. All these things people have constantly changing ideas, and it seems to me, theme would be, let's keep it as unchanged as possible. And even that's open to some subjectivity. But not to get all founding fathers about it, but I think it was the Andrews family that did donate it, 2 generations ago. Is that correct? Yeah.
A bargain sale.
Okay, okay. So it's, were there contingencies?
Not really.
Well, they conserved it, right?
Through
So
the
that
east,
has-
through with
yeah.
the conservation easement. You know,
Okay,
there are, pretty hard and fast rules with some, flexibility in it. But no, I don't think any contingencies from the Andrews family themselves. They agreed to the conservation easement, the conservation agreement on the property.
They made the agreement with the Vermont Land Trust, right?
Yeah.
And then sold the land to the town.
Right.
So they okayed all those, I would call them contingencies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a big list from the Vermont Land Trust. That was the Andrews family that made those decisions and then passed that on to the
Right.
town.
Yeah.
The easement sticks with the land,
Right.
even though the
Nice.
town owns it now.
and it sounds like the land trust philosophy really does influence the management of the property.
Very much.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say, let's let the ever-changing flow of ideas circulate with the intention of keeping the autonomy of the property as it is. Is that fair?
The town's autonomy.
Oh, the property's autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
For
I
those-
guess
for
a
those
little bit of
contingencies.
background on like it's the town's biggest public land holding that would possibly be accessed for people that don't own their own private forest, right? And so
Yeah.
one of the ongoing challenges that we're approaching is that, like, for folks that don't own their own plots of land, that's they voted for taking that on with the hope of having it as a conserved recreation area,
Open public.
open public
Yeah.
access, and then what that access looks like has been an ongoing debate. But having an eye as a committee member to what the needs of the public might be, particularly those people that don't have their own forests,
Mhm.
is something that, I don't know, I was gonna ask you about that as
Okay,
someone that I think there's inevitably some conflict there, probably.
okay.
As a neighboring,
Let's take a really obvious example. Some might say the best thing we can do is to pave trails all the way through. Some might say to pave trails for the use of access. To increase the use of access. I would argue that that would disrupt the health and well-being,
Mhm.
the ecology of the property, and detract from its original, the original intent of the people who donated it. And even though it would increase access, some could argue that's part of that swirling change around, it would come at the expense. It would come at the detriment of the property in a way that's very hard to backtrack should we change our minds. We as a town, and change our minds and decide that it wasn't a very good idea after all.
I was just gonna ask if you've had a chance to read the easement itself, because there's a sort of built-in tension in the easement as it's written. There's 4 purposes govern everything that follows, because it eventually gets down to some do's and don'ts. You know, you got to do this, you can't do that. But the kind of the governing purposes, there are 4 of them. No real hierarchy among them, so just because it's number 1 doesn't mean. But the first is to protect the forest and its functions and biodiversity and a long list of stuff. And then the second is to provide recreation for people in the town. And then there's a couple rules on what kind of recreation, but generally we've got those 2 things, and it's something we're constantly, you know, sort of wrestling with to try to find that balance. How can we do both? Because there isn't that contradiction that you nailed. You know, if even with an extreme example like paving, but
Right.
even with much lower degree of impacts, there still can be that compact or that conflict. And that's what we've been discussing for a long time.
Oh, Brad, you said that was 2, right? Protect the function of the forest, provide recreation. What were the other 2?
To conserve open space values and to require that it be managed with a publicly guided management process.
Few comments.
Open space, you say values?
Oh,
Yeah, to conserve open space values, scenic resources associated with the protected property for present and future generations.
And then
Thanks, Julie.
public
Yeah.
governance. Okay, cool.
And then the last one is, through a publicly managed or established management planning process.
Brad, do you have my time? Check.
yeah.
Yeah, it's 20 up, so
Could I make one
sure.
quick comment? Well, maybe not quick, because actually just wanted to build on things that have already been mentioned. The question, to what extent have you explored the forest? And the question of the easement, which is publicly available, of course. And then the thing that this committee is grappling with is the management plan, which is supposed to recognize the easement and acknowledge public input and a lot of other things. So question is, there's a draft management plan, which is in the packet for tonight and has been in previous meetings. Have you had a chance to look at the management plan? Okay, it's a big one.
No, I'm moving at the moment, so I didn't.
It's big and complex, but I think it reflects and especially the history reflects this issue that people have been addressing of this easement that recognizes natural resources and human uses of the forest, and the challenge is to make the most of both of those. But yeah,
At the same time, right.
Yeah. And so when you get a chance to look at the
I
management plan,
promise.
we should move along.
Yes.
And I think our task is to make a recommendation to the select board, and based on this conversation, this discussion, I think we should have a motion to transmit to the select board a recommendation relating to this application from Sonia Masterson.
I'll make a motion that we recommend Sonia to be on this committee. The select board.
Second.
I'll second.
So discussion of the motion. Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, that's good news. So as co-chairs, we will communicate to the select board that we make a recommendation. And their meeting is the first meeting in May, or one meeting in May, but they may be in time for that. They have 2 meetings in May and every month, so you'll probably be on the agenda for the early May one.
I would just suggest before that meeting that you to just pull up the management plan and take a read before the select board meeting.
I
Because they
promise.
probably will have some questions for you.
Yeah.
That you'll want to have that background information.
Thank you.
The easement as well.
And look,
Well,
Well,
thanks.
well, I just want to point out that we'd be very happy to have you, but that does not mean that you have to accept.
Thank you.
Scared you away.
The only other thing I'll bring up is, because Chase's seat will be vacant, this application will also then be forwarded to the Trails Committee, correct?
Yeah.
So I don't know how that plays into the timing on the select board and when RTC's next meeting
Well,
is.
actually, Duncan sent an email, at least to me, summarizing that because that essentially that Sonia would be applying for would not be eligible for the Trails Committee one.
Oh, right, because
That's right.
she's not, yeah, yeah.
We're
my
not a
bad, my
member of
bad.
the.
Yeah,
so-
good point.
So in
I
this
was
case,
thinking
the
the
Trails Committee
representative,
doesn't,
not
that's
the-
of course welcome to
but the,
make comments, but not obliged to, so.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I forgot it was the recommendation versus the representative, and this is his seat is the representative, which would preclude Sonia from being on that seat.
Well, so thanks for your application. Thanks for coming by this evening. And of course, very welcome to stay. And we'll see what we do. We've scheduled a really long meeting because we're trying to, I think as you've heard, we're trying to get something to the select board. We need to work on it.
Thank you for your consideration. I'll stay for a bit longer if fun.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And welcome to town.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
really.
You have a beautiful home.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying it.
Excellent.
So I think
Coffee time?
I'll have one. Otherwise, I'm just gonna
it's
just eat.
really just informational, isn't it? It's in the packet and we want to make sure everybody's aware of it.
Yeah. So we have 5 minutes allotted for this. Just mainly a reminder, we've got all committee members in the town have to complete this code of ethics training and sign a form. Excuse me. And there's more information in the packet on that. The timing isn't imminent. It's.
In fact, this is before you should even do one of the trainings.
It's,
One of the trainings you're supposed to do between June 1st and like September.
yeah,
So I was like, oh, I'll just get this out of the way. And then I went through the documentation and realized I can't even re-sign the ethics thing because I did it, it hasn't been a year yet. And you're supposed to wait until June to do it again, because that's after appointments happen.
okay.
So we have to do it annually and it's between June and I think it's like by the end of August. But there's an additional component now where you have to essentially take like a short course on the state website. So there's like a 45-minute video that you watch, and then there's a quiz, and then there's a certification that you get, and then you have to forward that to Duncan. So you can do that part now. And that you only have to do once every 3 years. So I did that yesterday and sent it along to Duncan, so I'm good for the next 3 years, but I had to set a reminder for myself to do the second part. I did pass. I did, yeah.
That would be.
If you make a
ironic.
mistake, it will just have you select the other option. And then, so you can't get anything but a 100 on it. So no pressure. You can also watch the video on, double speed on YouTube or whatever. So, I mean, whatever works the best for you. But I did have to set a reminder for myself to then do the second part in June. So I will just point that out. That
Because you're expiring in June, yeah.
all of us can't do that other part until June, just because of the way the language is written.
Okay.
Like if you were to do it now and then sign it with the date, you wouldn't be in compliance with what the instruction is. So it might get kicked back by Duncan if you sent him the pre-signed thing, because you're supposed to do it between June and August or something.
So there's a
Thank
long page of instructions that's in the packet, but it may not really explain the point that you've just raised.
It does. If you read the fine print, it's easy to just kind of, have your eyes glaze over and just click through and say, I agree. But it's not that hard. I mean, and honestly, the video is quite helpful. In the past, we've just had the one document, which is long and it's just kind of, it's a contract. So it's kind of annoying to read. Whereas when you have, the video with somebody sort of dictating it and giving examples and, you know, ask a few questions, and we'll pause for a few seconds for you to sort of decide whether or not you think it's an ethics violation. It's actually, I've found pretty helpful. Because it's like real life examples of like, here's something that could happen. Is this okay? Is this not okay? So it's more work, but I think it's going to help people understand better, you know, what people should and shouldn't be doing on committees. So I think it's a win overall.
The video is new. They haven't had that, right? Yeah, because
I think it's a state thing that they just,
yeah,
it was like a state requirement that just happened. I think it'll be on January of this year.
cool. Good. Excellent. Thanks, Sam.
Yep.
For that. All right.
Only 3 minutes
We're
behind.
3-4 minutes behind. That's great. We have a 45-minute section. 90, yeah, 90 minutes
Mhm.
coming up. All right, so we're into the management plan, Sonia. All right. So we've got scheduled to look at the ecology sections in the main body. At our last meeting, we looked at the background to it, which was proposed to go into an appendix. Earlier management plans had the background up front, and then eventually you got to the management actions, or the objectives and then the actions. Now, one idea being floated is to put the background in the back and move the management objectives and actions up front. The idea being that that's really what most people, when they turn to this document, are going to be looking for, instead of explanation of why we have those management objectives and action items. If they want that, then they can just go to the back. But some of us anyway, feel that it just might make for a more efficient process if we move those to the front. So at our last meeting, we went through the background on ecology. So tonight we want to try to get to the front end of ecology, which would be the objectives and the actions, and then do the same for recreation. Those two sections, which are probably the most involved at all. Go ahead.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Well, I trust everyone's seen that the present draft of the management plan I made a change, structural change, organizational change, just by saying there's a part A and a part B. So the section numbers are preceded by an A or B. So A is background and B is management objectives and actions. So I'm hoping that clarifies it. I mean, I think we've had, there's questions, should all the background go in appendices or should it become preambles to the management sections? But I suppose I view that as moving deck chairs rather than looking for icebergs. And at present, that's the way it is. So the A, B sections, that's the reason for it, but that's new since our last meeting. That's my proposal for the structure. So, yeah.
But some of that background content is still right now, for our purposes, in the appendix, right? It's not in A.
Well,
Is it?
for the ecology section, yes and no. There's basically a link. So like the section, it basically links out to the appendix, as it were. And I have a comment on that. And I didn't compare them like side by side to see if they were 100% the same. But what I was noticing, which I think currently is a little bit confusing, because it even turned me around when I was looking at these documents, was you have the A section, you get to ecology, where, each section is broken out by paragraph. And then the ecology section is just a link, which makes sense because of how big this attachment is. It's like 14 pages or something. But when you click on it, what you get is the first 6 pages of the appendix are the objectives and the action items, and then the background follows. So it's extremely confusing when you're in the A section, you click on the appendix, and then all of a sudden you're like, where am I? I feel like I'm now in the B section, and you are, because it's it looks verbatim, like those 6 pages at the beginning of the appendix are also what's in the B section of the management plan
It is.
itself. So my suggestion would be, let's get rid of those 6 pages because they're duplicated and nobody wants to look at duplicate text. And it's also very confusing when you link out to something that then seems like you're somewhere else. So it took me a couple of minutes to figure out like what documents were what. And I'm familiar with the management plan, having worked on it. So I can only imagine how confusing it would be for other users or readers. So
Yeah, what's in the packet is it lists Appendix C, draft ecological resources and stewardships, and then there's a link, but it's identified as an outdated link. And that, I think, really refers to the point you're making, which is that link goes to a document that sort of contains both parts, so it needs working to.
So, the management plan should not have hyperlinks, right?
Should it have a what?
Hyperlinks.
well, if it's a hyperlink right now, it may be because people are working on separate documents, but that could just be see Appendix C or see Appendix whatever, see Appendix X, and then, you would just go to the bottom of the document for that appendix rather than, clicking a link.
Okay.
So they're kind of one and the same. I mean, it's kind of easier to click the hyperlink right now. I don't know what the end goal is. And also remember that once we finish all of our work, and after the management plan or the select board has seen it, and we've gotten feedback from RCC and RTC, then our plan, I think, still is to have a professional go over the management plan as the final pass, where they're basically going to clean things up and sort of, bring it up to what like a standard management plan would look like. So they might have ideas on like, well, you shouldn't have a hyperlink here. You should have it be an appendix or whatever.
Okay, how do I sum what you noticed up? Sort of say that in a sentence for me.
Simply that the ecology appendix has duplicated content in it that we should remove because it's redundant and confusing.
And specifically, the ecology appendix has 6 pages.
I believe it's the first 6 pages. I could tell you in a second.
And what's on the agenda, it starts
Or
with
just
section
duplicate
2.4, so if you go to 2.4 in the management plan draft, and this is what you see. Section 2.4
Right.
refers to Appendix C.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I recognize this is sort of confusing because if you go to Appendix C, as Sam was pointing out, it's preceded by material that's really background rather than appendix. I think is that.
It's not background, it's the objectives and actions.
I'm sorry,
It's the reverse. But yes, it's the first 6
So
pages of that.
So it's really a duplicate of what's in the B section, and the
Exactly.
appendix should have that
Yeah,
first
that
6
should have
pages
been
deleted.
stripped
Yeah.
out.
Yep, so
It should begin on page 7, really.
yeah, so the appendix should be 10 pages instead of 16 pages. And then we'll have no duplicated content and it should flow much easier. If you're looking for the history in the ecology section, you either click the link or you flip to the appendix and you'll continue your 10 pages of reading there.
Yep.
Can we make that change real quick?
So
Fix it?
I mean, I think it's kind of messy. What the agenda says is we're going to look at 2.4. To look at it, we have to look at the appendix. But actually, the management section is present in this draft under B6, which is, the other B5 rather, which is on the agenda as the next one. Now, I think it's true to say that the ecology appendix was discussed at our last meeting, so we don't need to look at it again.
Right.
So we should probably bounce straight to B5 at this point. Does that make sense? Brad, you know this document
would
better than
think so.
anyone.
Well, that seems to be where it is right now,
Yeah.
at B5.
But Ian, you're gonna remove those 6 pages from
Um,
the appendix?
They're in PDF form. We can make a note to do that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
maybe,
a
he's
note in the
putting the
minutes?
note. I think he's asking, because Jim wants to.
Should I put
reflect
that in the minutes that
Oh,
you
yeah.
guys will remove those 6 pages?
Sure.
Ian will?
First,
So should we page down to B5 now and look
I
at
would, yeah.
ecology recommendations? In the B section, that's on page 24.
Okay.
There we go. So, and the format has been made pretty consistent. That green text is comments received and red text is modified from previous versions. But pretty much consistently it has that now. So I think at this point we're looking at not at the black text, which is what we've had all along, but we're looking at green text, which is received comments, or red text, which is changes.
Suggested changes.
Excuse me,
yeah.
the black text is not what we've had all along. The black text is what was rewritten per the assignments by Brad. So this is a big change from what was originally there. It is not what was there all along. That's an incorrect statement.
Is it
Just for the last
Is it
meeting.
new material, Brad, or is it just moved in from elsewhere, from previous versions?
Well, it's
It's new to the
It's-
second version of.
new. I mean, it's rearranged. Let's put it that way. I mean, we've got this, excuse me. Can't clear my throat. I think it says in the note, what, on the top, what it does is organized as the, I think it's also mentioned in the appendix, but it's organized according to the way Vermont conservation design, this kind of a blueprint for statewide conservation, the way that organizes its explanations and actions into landscape, community, and species level elements.
But Melissa, your point is that it's in black as if it was approved and
Right, so that's not the case. You were saying that was the original text. That is not the case. This is what was, when we were all assigned different pieces of the management plan.
Yeah,
This-
this is different.
This is different than what was originally. That's correct.
Right.
So you should
But I-
read it carefully to make sure that then you know what you're.
But I think,
Well-
isn't it the text that reflects what what's the result of that process where things were assigned to
fair.
individuals?
It is incorrect to say it is the original text that was there all along. The black is the
Okay.
rewrite that Brad
Mhm.
was assigned.
Okay, but it's text as submitted by the people who were given it as an assignment.
That's correct.
And so it's the material that we've had for some months, even if it's not
But
from
it is
a,
not the original text. It is a change.
No. I don't know what the original would be, you know.
It was,
Well,
well, yeah, I mean.
um,
this is
But I
very
mean, because
different.
it's evolved, but we've had this for a while.
I just want you to represent what we're looking at
yeah.
accurately for
Mhm.
people here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But,
That's why I'm
Okay.
but what,
saying.
in the interest of time, I think we have to be looking at comments submitted to this version. And at this point, comments are in green and black text has not received any comments. So really what's on our agenda, what's on our plate this evening is to look at comments that have been submitted or urgent things that have
so.
not been submitted in advance but do need addressing.
And
Well, that would definitely change my perspective if Brad has just free-formed a large part of it that we didn't realize.
This has not changed in the past, probably, I mean, this text is 100% different from the original management plan, you know, so it is red
Okay.
text in that sense, but between this meeting and last meeting, this is the same, except the stuff that's in red, so,
About 3 months old at this point.
yeah. And
Gotcha.
even, I think some of it even predated maybe that, but it has it probably evolved slightly 3 months ago. So if you looked at this material, you know, which has been in packets for multiple meetings and has been sent around in emails and you know,
Are you trying to hurry this process along? Cause I like.
Not
if
necessarily.
There's issues, there's issues. That's why
I'm just saying that, you know, a lot of us have looked at this already. And it is very good to point out that this has changed from the original management plan. So just because it's in black shouldn't mean that you should just say like, yep, it must be good. But I'm just suggesting that, to sort of piggyback off of what Ian was saying, is that, yeah, sort of in the interest of time, we have this that's written, it's been circulated for months now. So if you have issues with sections of it, you should certainly bring them up and we should talk through them and edit them now. But otherwise, I don't know if it's a good use of committee time to go through this word by word, you know, together, as if it were red text that we need to approve or deny.
this definitely has red flags for me, just the little.
It's
little
hard
bits-
because,
little
like,
bits
some
I
of the
read right
ways-
there.
The perspective that it's written in is not representative of the whole committee. So I guess I interpreted the editing charge as like, do we agree with this whole rewrite rather than write your own version? Right, and if it had been write your own version of the recreation piece, that seems like a very different charge than like just discussing this, but, and I know we'll get into the individuals, but I think that the downstream impact is we're spending a lot of time analyzing this version rather than the original, or talking about what we want to go into this version ahead of time.
Let me explain my perspective, which is we have a charge from the select board, which is to present a draft by the June first meeting in June. And so our urgent task tonight and in our May meeting is to get agreement on a version of the draft management plan that is presentable to the select board. It's a draft. They know it'll be a work in progress, but it's a draft that represents the things that have been agreed and the things that are still under consideration. So that's our task, is to converge on something that we feel is presentable, that we can send to the select board without being embarrassed. So,
Yeah.
and my assumption is that if the materials put in the packet, in this case, the draft management plan, have been looked at by members of the committee who have made mental or other notes of what needs discussing. So as we address section B5, the question to the committee is, are there things that should be discussed tonight in preparation for this being sent to the select board?
May I make a suggestion
No.
that you, instead of arguing whether people have read it or not read it, you slowly scroll through this section so that people can read it and comment now, rather than saying this was your homework, you didn't do it, too bad,
Yeah.
let's move on.
Or
Let's
could people, I mean,
let people have, scroll through it, let people look at it.
that might be good for public in attendance to be able to see it on their screens, but for the committee members, I would urge you to, everyone's got a laptop, scroll down and raise a question, page number, line number. I want to talk about
Yeah, I mean,
issue, and then on the screen we can zoom to that.
I'll start with, we might as well just talk about the power line above and below the power lines. Like,
Can you give me a page number and a line
All right.
number?
it's in both B5 and B6, it starts with B5.32, where there's a lot of reference in both those sections to
Yeah.
do whatever recreation other than biking above the power lines and biking below. And that seems like not a great division. Why is biking eliminated?
And there's a note from you to that effect that you disagree with the text.
Yeah, but it's worked its way into more and more parts of the text now. And that, we never had that vote. I mean, if we vote,
Can you give me a section number or a page number?
yeah, it's on B5.32, which is page
Here we go.
28, line 18.
Okay,
And it's also in the recreation section too, so we can,
right, that concept I know appears in about 3 or 4 different places. So highlighted on the screen would actually be the second paragraph starts, maintain hiking, hunting and skiing. See if I can, this. It's very difficult. Okay, I think I've got it.
I should say something right here. I'm in a tough position as co-chair. I'm supposed to help keep this give everybody a chance to talk and be fair and not be an advocate for a particular point of view, right? But now
this is your point of view, so
it is, so
take it.
I'm gonna ask, really watch me and make sure that nobody feels I'm being unfair. All right, and that I'm preventing you from talking or talking over you or whatever. Just help me on that. Otherwise, we're in kind of a jam. We're back to the elephant in the room, thankfully. We've been trying to get here for literally years to talk about this. Everything that comes before this, or a lot of what comes before this, leads up to this. So to jump over everything else, which is the rationale for doing this, and look at this in isolation, out of context, I don't think is really the way to look at it. Earlier, we talked, for instance, way up at the top, it talks about this concept of zones of influence for wildlife, which goes up to 1,000 feet or more for some species in some places. But there's this generally accepted kind of a standard, a pragmatic standard in our area in the Northeast of New Hampshire has 400 feet. Meredith Naughton's report, 330, she studied, all kinds of things and arrived at that. So anyway, so if we slapped, say, a 330-foot buffer, even a smaller one, and there are maps around each sensitive area in that forest, we wouldn't have any trails at all. So what this tries to do is figure out a way to maintain full public access to the whole forest. Public access to the full forest, let me say that, it's not full, but it would be hiking, whatever it says, hiking, hunting, skiing, snowshoeing, all these recreation things people would be able to do as they do now. We just wouldn't do things to bring new people into the top part of the forest, which is the most sensitive, the farthest from our population centers, the hardest to develop because we've talked about, the many issues there. Yeah.
I think we all appreciate your perspective on this, and I think it's a great, you have so many great points on this. I feel very strongly that the management plan should promote that conversation, but not codify these boundaries and rules, right? I think the boundaries and rules should be forever discussed, and you will, I'm sure, back up that viewpoint, very articulately and responsibly. But I think the management plan should point out the tension, but not necessarily try to define those boundaries. Does that make sense? I think that's really important. If we get mired in something like the zone of influence is X, or this area needs to be avoided,
Right.
Forever, that to me, that type of approach to the management plan is going to be, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I think having flexibility and having an open discussion about this stuff is very important. There's so many ways that, certain areas could become, more or less strict with public access. There could be, so many environmental implications of changes that are happening to the forest. It's very dynamic, right? And it's going to be logged again, and it's always growing. And so I think having that discussion is a great way to actually manage the forest. And the management plan should just point out what those various competing interests are going to be. Does that make sense? Does that seem fair?
Up in that.
But let me ask you a question though, Jim, so
Really
that
allowed
makes
to do
sense to me,
that.
but where do the rules go then eventually? Like where do the permitted and non-permitted and 100 feet, like where does it go?
Yeah, I think if the management plan, what is the cycle on the management plan? Is it 5 years? I think personally, I think each year there should be a specific document that's crafted that talks about things like, I mean, the one that pops in my head is, when is hunting season?
Yeah.
How are trail users going to be allowed in to the forest or not?
Yeah.
And line it up with hunting season, and each year that's going to be addressed. You can push that out to the hunting community, to the trail using community, and it's just understood ahead of time.
Yeah.
Dogs are always going to be a changing thing. Like if it's a couple dogs a year, no big deal. If it's 30 dogs a day,
Yeah.
that's a much different beast. So I think some of these things they should be revisited more often than the management plan is. And so is that fair, Brad? That like, let's just
Could I
leave it general, talk about the need to protect both sides, and then
respond,
Give Ian a chance, yeah, then I can come back. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, 2 or 3 things. One is that
Right.
in a meeting such as this, the chairperson isn't supposed to be taking a controversial position or pushing a controversial position. So it's sort of, given that that's the situation that both Brad and I are in, we try and just keep a kind of open perspective. And this raises the issue that I have 2 issues. One is that the committee has been wrestling for a long time, for 5 years, I suppose, with a logjam relating to public access and trails, and where should trails be multi-use and where should trails accommodate dispersed access, non-motorized, non-mechanized. And so this text here is an attempt to break that logjam, I think, is what Brad was saying, was it's sort of a compromise that tries to accommodate, but human access in a balanced way, based on the preceding materials, the background, and the ecology and science, as well as the adhering to the easement and other issues that need to be respected. The second point is that if we are working on a draft to present as a progress report to the select board, I'm hoping that they will give us some guidance, and then some of the guidance that I would like to receive from the select board, if they're willing to do it, is tell us how often can we make an interim change to the management plan? Because I think this is the question that's just been raised is how much can we sort of set things in stone or not? You know, does the management plan set things in stone, or can we go back to the select board and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 before year 10 and say, well, we really want to make these changes? And there is a precedent for a fairly substantial change being made midstream, and that was in our bylaws. We looked at our bylaws and we said, well, we need some changes. We took them to the select board. The select board makes some more changes. So now the management plan actually has revised bylaws. So if midstream you can change the bylaws, I would argue that midstream you can also change rules about like dogs or seasonal closures or other things, because those would be minor relative to the bylaws that we're operating under. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that on June 3rd we will get feedback relating to this issue of how clearly and definitively this management plan needs to be written, and to what extent can we write it in a flexible format, as I think Julian was recommending, if I heard correctly. What level of flexibility can we use to go back to with a new recommendation midstream between 10-year major revisions of the management plan? So those are perspectives that I'm hoping can, help guide us in this discussion about making this draft.
I can confidently say that if you, Brad, are going to propose that humans are not, how did you put it, encouraged in certain parts of the forest?
No, I didn't say that.
That's not, yeah, that's, I think,
What
the
was the word?
misrepresentation of what's being proposed.
That,
Help me out here then, please.
Let me get the exact text that's in the management plan itself.
I was riffing on what he actually just said.
Oh, gotcha.
But
no, I was at the confusion I had over where I put the word full in the sentence. So
okay,
yes, people will have something like, I forgot what I said, full. What I was getting away from there, certain types of uses, a very broad range of uses would be available everywhere in the forest. So people, what it said, maintain, biking, hiking, everything, blah, blah, blah. North of the vast trail. And south, we expand recreational stuff. We start building stuff to include bikes down there.
The current
Because
text.
the current stuff up there probably isn't suitable for a bike trail right away.
Yeah, so I mean, most of us, if not all of us, know that, dispersed access in the forest is guaranteed through the easement, for the entire forest, right? So even if we tried to dictate something like that, that would be in conflict with the easement. We can't close off the top of the forest, right? The text in the management plan as it stands, like the proposal here, is maintain recreational access north of the former vast trail at current types and levels while creating new and diverse options south of the vast trail. That is the current.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's not saying no humans can go above for one, it's vast trail versus power line. And that's another thing that I think there's been a lot of confusion over, because there's a big difference, especially in terms of connectivity. If you draw a line at the power lines, that cuts off ability for connectivity to VYCC. Also, if there's ever potentially an agreement with the landowners to the west, it severely restricts the ability for.
This draft, I think, refers to vast trail.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, vast, I think, is a better, if we're talking about borders, that's a better one to talk about. And then the other thing is.
Sorry, vast is better or the power?
It's more flexible in terms of providing better connectivity, and it also, there's basically an existing trail there that is cleared, that is walkable. I mean, there's a section near the wetlands that's a little soggy and maybe needs a boardwalk or something, but
so when you say, would you call that a cutoff?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just referring to
Well, I need to write something in. So give me a word.
outlined.
Not a cutoff, but a demarcation
Well, sure.
border. Okay, so and so what uses would be allowed north of the vast trail, and what uses would be allowed south?
there.
It just said the south was like expanding.
I can reread it. Maintain recreational access north of the former vast trail at current types and levels while creating new and diverse options south of the vast trail.
Okay.
I think that's text
what is that?
from the recreation section is what you're
Yeah.
reading, actually.
So-
It appears in different places. Are you
Yes, it
reading
does.
recreation section?
This is in the recreation.
Yeah, so
section.
we'll get to that, but it's
It's
basically.
essentially the same.
Oh, yeah, it's the same.
So
concept.
can you guys unpack that and explain what that means?
So north,
No, the expanded uses south.
expand recreational, it's halfway through that paragraph. So expand recreational opportunities between the parking lot and the former vast trail to include new and improved trails for mountain bikers, casual walkers, runners, elderly residents, and school groups. It doesn't say, you can't snowshoe down there, but of course you could. And as Sam points out, it's in the full access concept of the public can, subject to the particular rules, the public can go anywhere. So south, you'd be able to, trails would be built for bikers, walkers, runners, elderly, and schools.
And then how would things be,
Actually, Melissa, are you wanting to address this issue that's on the table right now?
I have a quick comment for the minute taker.
Yeah.
Chelsea's iPhone has joined us, so welcome, Chelsea. If you could tell us your last name for the minutes so that members of the public are just recorded who's here.
Thanks, Melissa. Chelsea, are you still on? Maybe your mic's muted, maybe, or.
Chelsea Brooks.
Chelsea Brooks.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Maybe we muted her. Okay.
Do you want to add anything else?
That was your,
Yes.
you had your hand up. Is that?
Well, when I have another comment for this section, but I don't want to interrupt this conversation, so I'll wait.
I'm good. I think I just want to clarify what the current use is and, does that answer your questions? in
no,
terms-
there's still, sorry, there's still, and I'm trying to type and, so, but a part of the description is pretty vague, yes? Which,
Well, I guess it requires you understand the current uses.
assume I don't.
Okay, so assuming you don't know what the current uses are, as I mentioned before, the conservation easement guarantees
Yeah.
dispersed
everywhere.
access. So right
That's it.
now, there are no, aside, there's the former vast trail and there's the old skid trails that exist in the forest. So some people, not that many, but people are up there using those trails. I use those trails, other people use those trails. People walk on them, snowshoe on them. I don't think anyone's biking up. Well, people do actually bike on the old vast trail. So I guess current uses maybe is a little bit too vague, but people hunt up there. So when I read at least the recreation section that's talking about recreational access at current types and levels above and below.
See, that's the map of the vast trail in blue. So it's below, and this is the property that.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
So, but just in terms of the language that Brad has written,
You need that? You want to check reverse on that? Would that help?
This
Jim.
below, that's above,
If you want to copy and paste,
That's
that's,
below
you have the
this,
management plan.
that's
open,
putting
you just,
everything in
you know,
just that
search for
little-
35.
below this one right
2.2.
here.
Yeah,
So it's line,
That's the vast one, right.
basically lines
Oh, right,
18
that's
to
it's limiting access.
Four-fifths, yeah. Okay.
Chase, is this
18
something I
to
should put on
22
the,
on page
is this something I
28.
should put on the screen?
It's just the proposed map.
Oh, that's not in the management
So
plan right now, I think.
well, I think my issue is that at current types really should be spelled out. You should be very specific about what you're proposing be allowed and not allowed and where.
So
Yeah.
that's for the recreation, right? What,
Yes, but I mean,
so where is it? We can fix it.
what I've been looking at is it's right at item B 5.2.2, the landscape level action items.
Okay, where,
I was just trying to find the most concise,
okay.
sentence that
Okay.
kind of described this, because we're looking at the other one that had, it was a
We
little
were-
bit more verbose.
Chase,
But
you,
that's
you have
not
a-
concise, right?
Chase had us at 5.3.2, right? So maybe that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the same thing comes up in.
It does, but Jim's trying to get the specific language, so we
Yeah.
ought to all be looking at the same page.
Yeah,
So 5.2.2. Okay, so maintain record at current types, which are spelled out in the plan elsewhere, I guess. But we can, at the first mention, we probably should be as specific as possible. Would help probably.
Yeah, I
If
think,
that's the first time we hit on that point.
Chip was up to.
So 5.2 point
That's the
which?
vast
Five-
blue.
5.2.2, page 25,
Yeah.
That's what's on the screen.
I'm
now.
not saying
line
really
31.
public access is just this.
So Jim was looking at that and that is kind of vague, yeah. And I was
Yeah.
quoting
so
chapter and
that's saying
verse
Public access.
later where it
increase
gets
here,
specific. So that,
but It's not giving much.
that could
for-
definitely ought to be clarified,
About which, to me, doesn't seem like real public.
but it's
access.
not getting into the
So,
nitty gritty. Go ahead.
well, I want to get back to what you said, Jim, about what level of detail we want in the management plan
Process.
and have that as like the framework and then where we want to keep our more detailed conversations that we want to revisit. So
Yeah,
and it's an interesting proposal because, making like a lawmaking analogy here, laws get made and then the regulations are the things that implement the laws. When you get down there and the regs are the things that get sort of renegotiated year after year, the law stays. And sort of, it sounds like you're making a parallel argument here that the
I got a
management
point of
plan-
order here. We've got two side conversations going on.
Yeah.
The recording and the public would be confused by having two sound recordings going at the same time. So we must maintain, according to open meeting law and everything, one speaker at a time, no side conversations.
Sure.
So which conversation are we recognizing?
You want to go,
I think-
Melissa?
Do you want to bring that, you want to talk?
My comment is for further down.
Julian, we'll get-
Section, so go ahead.
Okay,
Great.
go ahead, Julian.
Okay, so on this metaphor of like law versus and regs, regulations, that is, it sounds like what you're saying, Jim, is like the management plan should be the law and then annually we go over the regs. And the regulations, I guess, would specify some of the things that I think are now here. We all agree that we want a monitoring plan. We want to see what's happening. We want to see what kind of uses. We want to see what kind of impacts. And so it seems like it would be logical to do the monitoring and then a review of the current rules to see if the results of the monitoring reflect the need to change the rules as they are. That's kind of the vision that I'm getting from what you were saying, Jim. But I'm still struggling to figure out like if that's the case, and I think that makes a lot of sense because it's gonna be more responsive to the immediate changes at hand. It can sort of maintain the high level monitoring or rather management plan without having to reform it all the time. Would we then do the actions and the specific things then go into something else like a conservation plan, a trail plan, a forestry plan, and so forth? Are there a series of accompanying documents that would go along with the management plan? Like, how does that work? Where have you seen it work? And how would we go about making that structure if we wanted to go that approach? Because we're sort of putting it all in here because we've been talking about this for a long time, but
yeah,
like,
the only other situation I've looked at is the Heinsberg Town Forest,
Okay.
and that's how they set it up.
and so what's the thing that they have besides the management plan?
They have a trail plan, they have a yearly MOU with Fellowship of the Wheel, they have they have like appendices.
Okay,
Yeah, but the management plan is very much just like a bullet list of here are our priorities, and I think it is a little bit specific to certain parts of the forest,
okay,
but it's not super specific such that it's, creating borders within the forest that certain uses are allowed here or there. It more, to me, it feels like it promotes those conversations and it lets the current committee work through those issues kind of in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And very much with each potential trail or use or change, it's then hashed out.
okay.
But again, that's just my read on their system and
Yep.
I feel like, sorry.
No, you're good. I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, I just worry that getting into these specifics is we're just gonna get so mired in disagreeing on the minutia that like of the difference between the power lines and the Bass Trail or this use versus that use. That to write the management plan, we don't really need to make those decisions now. That those decisions certainly would need to be made if we were talking about, building a trail into that part of the forest or a different use that's not currently allowed or whatever, then to me, that's the time to then say, look, this part of the forest serves this ecological function and we cannot sacrifice that with humans' presence.
Yeah.
Great time to then, oh, well, okay, what if the trail went over here? Or what if we logged this area differently? Or what if, then you can hash that all
What's on
out.
the table right now is sections of the draft management plan that have been identified for discussion this evening. And I think we have converged on a really important question, which is this demarcation using the vast trail as a tool for determining what's recommended, for the northern section and the southern section in terms of human access. And I think we've agreed that this demarcation has been based on a lot of work done by the committee over the years and a lot of input, and an attempt to do to resolve this horse and cart issue that's been raised so often by the public, that the human access can't drive the ecology has to drive the human access, human activities.
Yeah, but Ian, does the ecology drive the management plan?
Yeah.
Right. That's
Well,
where we're at.
yeah,
We're-
so
we're
that-
not talking about actually driving.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess where I was heading was what we have on the agenda is we start with the ecology section, and the ecology section, for better or worse, raises this issue of a demarcation zone between demarcation line, the vast trail between what happens above and below.
Right.
So we've sort of spilled over into recreation because that text, essentially the same text, the same concept is appearing in both ecology and in recreation. Well, on the face of it, we should resolve one before the other, but at the same time, this is the huge sized log in our log jam that's been present for a matter of years and multiple meetings. We keep revisiting this, and so I view this as an opportunity to deal with this log jam. And so I really personally, I want this meeting and our next meeting to arrive at some kind of a concept, some kind of an agreement about are we going to use this text or not in this version of the draft, and is this what we're going to take to the select board? Because I think without reaching some kind of a consensus about this question, we're going to be drifting and we're going to look really bad when we go to the select board. If we say, well, we're still, after all these years, we can't make a recommendation. So I really want to sort of force this meeting.
What about this? What if we include that demarcation, but in the management plan, we say it's going to be revisited in a certain amount of time? That's not necessarily 5 years. That's a shorter amount of time.
I don't know about that demarcation. I disagree that we've converged on that demarcation.
Yeah, I also disagree. I mean, that takes 4/5 of the forest and says not meaningful public access that most people could
That's not.
No, not true.
do. I mean, I'm saying the average person, when I'm walking my parents, is not gonna be able to bushwhack up
Yeah,
those old logging roads.
my 4 and 2-year-old are definitely
Yeah,
out.
I'm seeing two different questions here. One is a process question, right? Is the process that we codify every use in the management plan, or is the process that we put the best science we have available, the zones of influence, which I think are awesome, and identifying the sensitive habitats, and then have a conversation when an idea like a trail or limiting access for hunting comes up. Then we look at the management plan and vote as a committee.
A step back, we look at the easement, because I think the easement is really, well, it determines what we can put in the management plan, but it also makes very clear a distinction between dispersed access, non-mechanized, non-motorized, and trails which are designated for mechanized maybe bicycle use, so that, you know, the present situation is that we have dispersed access, we have old roads that people use, people go hiking, hunting, skiing, and all those other things, but this is an attempt to address this elephant in the room, which is where should the management include trails designated for mechanized use. So, you know, we start with the easement, and the easement has poses some very clear guidelines for this discussion.
I mean, we should start with the easement. I totally agree with you. That's the base document. That's like the real fundamental constitution. It doesn't really limit or make a terribly large distinction between mechanized travel and non-mechanized travel. It just says if you're going to be on mechanized stuff, mechanized recreation such as mountain biking or animals, transporting humans may be permitted in the discretion of the grantors if such uses are regulated in the management plan and are consistent with the purposes of this grant.
And those last words are.
Which is to say, you know, if we put it in the management plan and the way that we describe it is consistent with the purposes of this grant, then we're good. So it's not, I don't think that's a distinction from anything else. We just need to be consistent with the purposes of this grant.
Well,
And if we go back to the purposes of the grant, you know, it's pretty wide open. It's those four things we said. The purposes are, well, the things we said at the outset, conservation, recreation, open space, and, you know, public process.
read what's under conservation, though, Julian.
To conserve productive forest land, wildlife habitats, biological diversity, natural communities, riparian buffers, wetlands, soil productivity, water quality, native flora and fauna on the protected property, and ecological processes that sustain those natural resources as they exist on the protected property, and to ensure that they can evolve in the future. Number two, provide for non-motorized, non-commercial, recreational, education, and other appropriate community uses. So it doesn't solve the problem, and we've talked about this. It wants to do all of these things that we all want to do. We do want to conserve the forest. We do want to provide for continuity. We do want to maintain the ecosystems and the habitats, and we want to recreate in the forest. That's where we are. So I don't think saying that the easement solves it is accurate. It's not. And by the way, you know, the next page where it says, what should the management plan include? Right? Because this is kind of what we're asking. And it says, it should include provisions required under this grant to identify actions necessary to accomplish the following, and shall appropriately balance all the resource attributes of the property. And this is number 2 on page 3. And, you know, A, identify and address the management needs of the recreational uses that may need special or more intensive management focus. I think we're doing that. Provide for public access and meaningful recreational links to private and public lands. I think we're doing, you know, we've talked about that. That's the connectivity piece, and links to other places. Include a forest management plan approved by grantees, okay? To, you know, harvest timber and commercial non-timber forest products. Provide a plan for road, sign, trail, and sanitary facility use with minimal impact on water quality, etc. Provide for sustainable use of fish and wildlife resources. Provide for identification and protection of natural communities, plant, wildlife, aquatic, etc. Provide as necessary for any proposed use of the riparian buffer zone, ecological protection zone.
So Julian, we know that text. We've
Yeah,
read
but
the
what I'm
easement.
saying, Ian, is that you're
But
arguing
I-
that
well-
it gives a special consideration to a particular group of activities, and I would argue that it doesn't. It's all in there. This doesn't help us. You can't say, you can't talk about trails because the easement doesn't allow for that. That's not true.
No one
But
said.
given that background, I really want you to focus on this text that we've identified as of key importance. And given that background that's from the easement, would you accept this existing text and support it, or would you want to change it? If you want to change it, how would you change it?
Okay. Yeah, those are good questions. I do have some changes that I'd like to see. I just don't, the only thing I object to is using the easement as like a sword or a shield to say that whatever our priorities here, the easement indicates tilting a hand one way or another. We have inherited, it's an excellent easement actually, because it wants to achieve all these things. It is our problem to find that balance that it suggests finding. So, but let's not use it as a sword or a shield to say you can or can't do that. We need to do all the things that are in the easement.
And you know, I try to watch the person who's speaking, but I'm also watching the transcript because that helps me
Of course,
understand.
of course.
That's why I
No
keep
worries.
looking back.
I know.
So you know that.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that proposal does achieve everything. We protect the most sensitive part of the forest, which fortunately happens to be, the most challenging. We've learned everything from, with the slopes, the soils turn out. If you can, that's in the recreation section now, it's an addition, but that forest ecology management thing that everybody was invited to, the soils aren't great up there for trails. So what are we doing? We got to hauling gravel up there or something to make trails. So from a pragmatic standpoint,
Nobody's proposing.
Yeah.
That's,
well,
I mean, haul in gravel for trails. No, that's, we can eliminate
okay,
that.
but it's poor soils and they say that's what you do when you have lousy soils, okay? Sinuosity says we have to build boardwalks up there if,
For
I'm
for
that-
wetlands,
For that particular,
for wetlands.
yeah, there's a real wet seepy area where
Pretty
the
common.
connector would come down.
Which
Nobody
is
would
a
be,
feature to
nobody would
protect.
be banned from that.
Right, but just to note that those bridges and so forth are to protect
Those, I'm sorry.
the bridges that you're talking about are to protect the soil and to protect the
yeah,
wetlands
so-
and
but I'm
for helping
saying-
with erosion and stuff.
Yeah, right. But it's also likely to soak up more town resources. I mean, this plan, if we just talk town resources, would focus our efforts on the easiest part of the forest to manage.
Yeah.
Instead of, going up to the hinterland to an area where you have both said nobody's gonna use it. I mean, Chase was talking about nobody wants to bushwhack up there. I don't know if my grandparents would want to grind a mountain bike up there either,
Yeah.
I mean, I would
I'm
rather,
not saying with no trails, but
well, no, this doesn't say no trails. We would lightly maintain the existing trails that are up there, the forest roads and in the skid trails. We could mow those and they would be useful for pedestrian travel. So everybody who's been walking up there would actually find it a little bit easier maybe to go up there.
But I have one last thing to say about that, Brad, because I don't object. This was originally Melissa's idea to start at the bottom and then eventually maybe move to the top if it's appropriate. So on that, I think we may have converged before, to your point earlier, Ian. But to put in the management plan that we're never going to go up there, and to say that we're going to expedite something, when the management plan is in theory permanent, as you suggest, or at least in this 5-year cycle, that doesn't sit well with me. So the parts that say expedite the lower part and avoid the upper part and don't build anything in the upper part, those are the things that I object to because I don't agree. That now in the practical sense of like a logical sequence, I think Melissa's probably right. I think you do start lower and then eventually you evaluate going higher. But I don't think it means that in the management plan, you preclude the option of going higher, especially because as when we look at the map of where that vast trail is and where the power lines are, it really is 4/5 of the forest that you're leaving out as a possibility for further recreation, or newish recreation. And that doesn't mean you can't put new stuff in there without respecting all the issues that we've talked about previously, like making sure that there's winter and spring protection for the animals that are up there, like extended closures, like erosion control. I mean, we've talked about a lot of ways that I feel like can achieve all of the purposes that are in the easement and then hopefully will be reflected here. I don't think precluding construction above those lines makes sense in the management plan. It might make sense for an annual plan or even a biannual plan, but not in the management plan.
So yeah, I have a few thoughts. So I think that this proposal, as it were, the text that's currently in the management plan is simply a way of trying to address the science that we've learned about in the forest. It's not, I don't think it's necessarily trying to weaponize the easement, to tip it towards conservation or recreation. I think it's simply taking those points and then looking at the science. I mean, some of the stuff, including Meredith Naughton's material, I mean, she spent a bunch of time in that forest studying that actual landscape.
Yeah.
And the reality is, and it's not really reflected in the management plan, is that if you tally up all the different sensitive areas in that section, if you consider slopes, if you consider wetlands and vernal pools and perennial streams and the sensitive natural communities like dry oak and red pine and hemlock, you end up, even if you don't put buffers on it, you know, you have an interesting patchwork of things that you should be avoiding.
Yeah.
And then if you were trying to use the best recommendations that we know of currently based on the science, you end up with a map, which I don't know if this is anywhere in our materials, but it basically, this is a 200-foot buffer. This isn't even the 330 to 400 that's suggested by like the scientists. You already end up looking at a forest that has most of the entire top ends up being yellow aside from a few pockets. And so I think that this was an attempt to basically try to get something, because the thing is what happened is we've been going back and forth on like, do we need to conserve everything? Can we put trails in? How do we put trails in?
Yeah.
And this is at least an attempt to get something in writing that actually moves us forward.
Totally.
But, you know, here we find
agree.
ourselves again, just arguing back and forth. So my suggestion is, you know, a couple things. One, maybe we just need a vote on, you know, somebody needs to make a motion and we need to vote. We can all, you know, talk our 2 minutes and then come to a vote on, do we agree or do we disagree that we, you know, bifurcate the forest and have things, you know, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And then another suggestion would be like, well, if we're not doing that, or if we don't want to make that motion and vote on it, then there needs to be an alternative, because if we don't have that way of managing the forest, then all of a sudden we've got carte blanche again to just put trails wherever we want in the upper section. And I think that we need to have some kind of guidance. We can't just have like good faith that the trails that go in are going to be responsible, because like mistakes can be made. And if you don't actually put stuff in the plan that says we need to maintain X amount of distance from this type of material, you know, this type of landscape, and that type of landscape, there's stuff we have to follow, like the 35% slope rule. That's, you know, that's dictated by the town, right?
That's not.
But
fact.
sure, but
That's not true.
okay,
That's
well,
there's so many trails in this.
let's
town
not, all right, let's not talk about that right now. I mean,
that you just brought that up.
well, the zoning administrator told us
Right.
straight up, you cannot develop above 35%
The
slopes. I'm
zoning
gonna-
administrator took a stance that's new and different,
Okay,
asserting that
we're
trails
kind of
are,
getting like outside of like the.
trails are development. I want to make sure.
We've talked about the slope thing like 3 different meetings before, and like the
I
current.
don't accept that that is a barrier.
Okay, well, all right, so you don't agree with the zoning administrator, that's fine. We don't need to just talk about slope here.
You're not alone.
You know, but so my point is that there's guidance that's provided by the town.
Yeah.
For things like slope, whether or not you agree with it, or whether or not we think the zoning administrator or the development review board would rule in our favor or against us in terms of developing over 35% slope. That's besides the point. The point that I was trying to make is that there are other things like vernal pools, dry oak, red pine, you know, perennial streams, stuff that needs to be protected in the forest. And in fact, some of those are actually in the conservation easements, like a vernal pool. Those are really important. But there are others, also dry oak is noted in the conservation easement. So we need to put something in the management plan that says like, here are the inappropriate places to put trails. And maybe it isn't a blanket, nothing, you know, north of the vast trail, but what we're trying to get to here is to actually have a way to break the log jam and for us to like be able to move forward with like, how do we develop trails? So like, I think that it's not that we've all agreed on this or that we've converged on it simply because it's like writing on the page. And I think
I
we
see
need
a
to-
window of opportunity here,
I do. as well.
because Sam, it's kind of like, oh, sorry.
I do as well. So I take your point, Sam, and I absolutely agree with you that we got to protect the vernal pools. They're in the, I mean, we have to protect the forest. I mean, it's not that like I agree with any particular part of what you're saying. I agree with your whole sentiment there. Absolutely. And I think that the zones of influence are a really useful tool to think about how best to place the thing. I don't think we should look at the zones of influence as the only guidance to where you put a trail or not. Because another part of the Meredith Martin report and also another part of Sue Morse's conversation is that it's a temporal thing. It's not only a spatial one.
Mhm.
So it is largely a spatial thing, true, but also it's when you are having an impact on the forest and the creatures in the forest. And so, you know, if we think a little bit more creatively, I think, yes, there are some spatial limitations that we should take into consideration. I think they are primarily avoiding particularly sensitive spots in direct ways. But also, I think it's like letting the forest rest. You know, I mean, I've made this point before, but like if you give these trails 7 months off a year, that's a ton of time. And in COVID, I mean, you know, we had deer walking down Fifth Avenue after 3 months. You know what I mean? Like here in Vermont, we're going to recover very quickly, and we can have a lot of compatible uses. It still demonstrates care for the forest and the habitat where the creatures live, and also allows for some recreation without necessarily zoning it into 1 and 2 just now. We could have very strict controls on time, much more strict controls, for example, than any other trails that are in town at the moment.
Mhm.
And I think we could all agree to that and have also a careful placement. And I mean, I think that is what's achievable.
I think that I'm not opposed to that if we have it all written out,
Yeah.
but thus far we don't have that. We've talked about some of these ways of doing it, but nobody's written out what we're going to do. Like, so hard rules on vernal pools and dry oak, but then for hemlock, we're going to allow use in the summer and we just want to protect it in the winter because that's good wintering habitat for deer and turkey. And for whatever, for the mass stands that are providing, food sources for animals, that maybe the trails are closed during the season where like those are dropping and so without having an actual something to look at and for us to vote on, like we can talk about it, but again, it kind of comes back to like this sort of like, I don't know, sort of just like good faith, like assuming that we're going to do the right thing. And that's not how management plans work. Like the management plan needs to be prescriptive, like that's why we have objectives and that's why we have action items so that we can prescribe the best options
But that
and
sounds to
then
me
follow
like
them.
you feel like there needs to be a trail proposal put forth.
No.
Like what?
No, not a trail proposal. I think what needs to be is parameters for trail building. So right now what we have is, this is a very basic parameter for trail building, which is to say no trails north of the vast trail and put more trails south of the vast trail. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's why we might need to vote on it. So I'm saying if we're not going to agree to that, which is fine, and like we vote, we discussed, we vote as a group.
Yeah.
If we're not doing that, what I'm saying is that we need to put some kind of parameters in place to help guide our hand for trail development, because otherwise you can end up with a situation where it's like, well, we threw out that plan and now there's no guidance and we can just put trails wherever we want. And then we're in a much, much worse place. So I think that this is an attempt to try to find some way forward. And maybe it's not the right way forward, but it's at least it's an attempt. And if
So-
we're going to consider a different
I want
attempt.
to interrupt if I may.
Sure.
For 2 reasons. One is Cecilia has a hand up, and the other is that I really want to focus this discussion. I'm seeing side discussions again, and I think for better or worse, we've really converged. We've really converged on this fundamental question, the logjam, and there are a number of reasons. Well, personally, that I like the proposal for the vast as a demarcation, at least for the time being. One of them is the town zoning administrator, who made a pretty strong recommendation that for a town forest, for town property, not necessarily every property, but for town property, this particular town property, it would be very helpful to use vast trail as a demarcation, and using zoning regulations, but we're aware of others. So, that's a strong argument for the vast. So I'm using that as a demarcation. I recognize that Sam was pointing a few minutes ago to the idea of having a vote or a motion or something relating to this issue of the vast trail demarcation. And I would sort of make a friendly amendment to that if that would become a motion, which is to say, for our presentation of a draft progress report on the management plan to the select board, we will include that. Now I'm not going to put that motion on the table. If I welcome that motion, because I think it would really help us move forward. So
you're
I guess I should
encouraging
leave it
motion.
there, and we've got Cecilia wants to comment, and Melissa does also.
Okay, I'll jump in. Yes, thank you, Ian. Partly I wanted to bring the conversation actually back to you and back to what we're going to do. But I also thought there were a lot of good ideas that were coming out in those three folks, Julian, Jim, and Sam. And I personally don't want to vote up or down a hard demarcation at the Vast Trail. I think this is a really good place where we would use some sort of adaptive management kinds of things, stage management with monitoring, with plan to collect data, and then a date by which we want to review that and decide whether we're going to build another trail or not. I really like the idea of paying attention to seasonality. We can close trails. We can also make any groups over a certain size, so that there's not some huge rally of any kind that would be using the trails without approval of the committee. So there's different ways we can deal with the sensitivity up there. And I just wanted, I really appreciated us also going back to the easement, the easement, and where it talks about what it minimally looks for in a management plan. The very first thing is to identify and address the management needs of the recreational uses that may need special or more intensive management focus. So I don't think we can step away from this and say something general and defer it to another time, as I think Jim was suggesting, when we actually have a trail on the being planned, because we actually have been trying to plan trails, and it has been the time several times in the last few years to make those decisions. But I think what we're hearing is the concerns, and it's even in the easement further down when they talk about, non-motorized and non-mechanized stuff would require permission of I guess the committee and the select board ultimately. So they've kind of, taken a bunch of recreational uses and pull them out, saying this needs more attention. They say we need to identify those management needs. So I think that we are at the crux of the problem, and voting up or down a limit across a line across the map, I don't think it's going to satisfy people. I think if we do that and send it to the select board, that's all anybody's going to talk about is that line. Whereas it needs something more nuanced about where people who have fears about what might happen, they can see that we're going to collect, that we recognize that we're going to collect data on that. We have, schedule of when we might expand uses or contract them as need be. That was my thought. So I would have real trouble if we had to vote tonight on that line. I would have real trouble doing that without any of the special and more intensive management focus that the easement is calling for.
Melissa's up next.
Thanks, Cecilia.
I'm just going to jump ahead to something really quick in B5 4.2, building on the idea that there's maybe too much specificity in this section. Line 7 says maintain at least a 70% canopy within hemlock stands. I don't think that's an actionable item for us to maintain a percentage count on the canopy of hemlock stands. And it points to that perhaps some things are getting too specific in here.
Did you get that for the minutes, the section number?
What was the section number?
Page
4.2, line 7. And I think I'm bringing that up because it points to it. Maybe there's a little bit too much specificity. And that's kind of where we're getting hung up here now.
Yeah.
That may have come from the forestry plan, Melissa. I'm not sure, but that may have been Ethan's recommendation to keep a hemlock forest healthy. You
And the
need
other-
70%.
The other thing I just wanted to say, going on a little bit of a different tact when you guys were talking about slope earlier, is to please be careful if you are planning to or have talked to the head of the DRB, David Sunshine, that is considered ex parte communications, which will disqualify him and possibly you from votes in the future on in matter of slope in the forest. So please do be careful about that. You should understand that it has to go through the process. You can't just go to David Sunshine and talk to him about whether or not they'll waive the process for us. So please do be careful on that and know that you have to go through the process.
Good point.
Would David? Seems like he would have to recuse himself anyway. Maybe not.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just
Because he's
know.
adjacent.
Yeah. So much of this logjam is associated with a potential connecting trail to his property.
But then wouldn't something
I'm
have to
saying you
recuse
just
yourself
need
and
to-
nobody else?
Yeah.
all the neighboring.
I will refer you to the ethics training, which has great text for you to
Really?
consider in terms of these types of things. That, you know, I can't quote them exactly, but
Does
it
it go
goes-
David Sunshine?
it doesn't, but it does talk about, you know, basically an individual's use versus like public use and when the line sort of starts to blur or gets crossed. And, you know, there's sort of levels of like, no, you know, if you're using the town parking lot the same as everyone else, then like you can vote on something because like you're just another person using it. But if you stand to benefit in some greater way, then you need to recuse yourself. And so, but it's complicated. So that's why the training's like 40 minutes.
Okay.
So while we're a little bit off the management plan, we're getting towards 8:15, which is
Yeah.
the time that we should
Yeah.
move on to next items, and a key one is items for the agenda of our main meeting, and so I think it would be,
Can I ask a
we should
question?
try and wrap this up and then get to the question of what
Right.
are we gonna have as our objectives for May?
Can I ask a question to you two? Do you think you were talking about a specific set of guidelines for designing a trail, avoiding vernal pools, dry oak? Do you think that we could have a set of guidelines that was sufficiently strict such that you guys would feel good about any potential trail that could be put in? Or is this demarcation thing, are you pretty entrenched on that? Like,
The demarcation is really there to be a practical thing. So we don't get buried in minutia with every trail concept. I mean, what Cecilia talked about, what Sam, everybody has really alluded to this, or Julian, the seasonality, the temporal aspect of it, right, is right on. If we want to slug it out, you know, in the future over every trail and have to go through all this, have to look for benchmarks. We don't have benchmarks to be able to monitor stuff with right now. So I think that hard line of demarcation, it isn't all that impactful, actually. It's bikes. We'd block bikes up there because bikes need new trails. All other forms of recreation are wide open of non-mechanized, non-motorized recreation. Would be fine up there. We're just talking bikes. And I think it would really simplify the committee's work to focus on a smaller part of the forest with relaxed guidelines where we don't worry about the ZOIs down south, because like I said before, if we worried about those things, the whole thing would be off limit. We don't have the luxury, say, of the Green Mountain Forest to put, you know, to shift the long trail over 100 feet if we have to, because, you know, there's 4 miles on either side of it are pristine. You know, it's not going to have that impact. Up there, we've got 428 acres. I think it's 3/4 of a square mile. And man, you start applying the science, just the flight distance to that, and it really gets tricky. And I think for, you know, the amount of time that a volunteer committee has to devote to this, it really gets hard. I mean, I see both sides.
Well, can I just interject a little bit in that, like, I think the science is super important, but we're assuming I interpret a little that we're assuming a stance that putting in a well-designed trail is not conservation. Where like all through I've taught college level ecology before, and conservation is totally compatible with some of these uses. And I've read through the science, and I think, of course, there is impact when humans travel through an ecosystem, but calling that destruction to the ecosystem is a really different thing.
What's an ecosystem?
An ecosystem is all of the components that make up a place, all living and non-living.
And what do those components do though?
Where are you going with this?
They interact. I mean, it's a web, right? So if you go through there and you put a bike trail right alongside the dry oak forest, the predators aren't going to go in there, for instance, right? Because they're going to be spooked by the people on the bikes, right? They don't go in there. They don't, and all the things they do, like this amazing thing I read recently, just bobcat kills a squirrel, oak trees grow because the squirrel has cached acorns all over the place. They remember where they are. They're really good at that, it turns out. But every time an owl or a bobcat or whatever nails a squirrel, there's going to be oak trees, right? So if you scare the bobcats away, the squirrels are just going to keep eating the acorns. It's highly simplistic, but you get the idea.
Of course, and like you could argue for condensing use along a sustainable corridor and eliminating a lot of the dispersed use just because people are going to hike on a well-built trail a lot more. And maybe it does go adjacent to some sensitive areas, but I think those of us that use the remote trails know that like going within 300 feet of a wetland is very different from tromping through a wetland, right?
You don't muddy it up, but whatever's used in the wetland, it's not going to want to use that wetland if there are people within 300 feet.
But a well-built trail inherently means less impact in other places.
Well
It's
built,
also not
I
a
mean, the
permanent
surface
impact.
may be good, but it's not well located. We're not talking so much building, it's the way where they're located is the issue. And I'm just saying a simple rule like that line of demarcation, and maybe it's too hard and fast, but it's the hardest place in the forest to develop. It's farthest from the parking lot. It's farthest from the village. I know,
It's our only way that connects to,
so
it's
what?
also the coolest part of the forest.
So walk, snowshoe, ski. Why do you have to pedal through there?
Maybe.
I have to, but I'd like to. I don't buy in that that's more impactful than other uses. There's a paradigm being pushed that like, there's all these uses and then there's bikes.
Well, because it requires more of a trail and that, you build it and they will come.
I don't think it requires more. I think mountain bikers care to build better trails.
Yeah, but
You can
I have a
mountain
question.
bike right down from the top and you could make your own trail down there, no problem. But
Brad.
people have ethics about it.
What if
sorry.
a trail existed, but bikes were not allowed? Would that have a different impact?
Well,
You reckon?
that's kind of what it says we would do. We would have trails where bikes.
Well, except I guess it still feels like like using the existing trails, which are basically skid roads, to me is it's less inviting, it's less accessible, and it has a more significant environmental impact.
Well,
So-
if they were lightly maintained skid roads.
Yeah, but given the pitch, the concerns about 35%, like the pitch of the trail is so much more important than
So
the terrain that it's on,
Right.
right? Which is one of my problems with Tyler's point. Like if you're traversing a little steep slope, to me, that's better than a skid road, which was made by a 50,000-pound skidder driving straight back down to the log
in the
landing.
winter,
No,
in the winter.
all times of the year,
Okay, but in the
I would
winter.
reckon.
But they tend to wash
Historical.
out more.
Yeah,
No,
it's not an
sure.
ideal recreational path
Right.
for
But
a
you
number of
still get-
reasons.
So you could put your water bars on that instead of on a new trail. Because you're still gonna want water bars, so.
Yeah, but as soon as a trail is not vegetated, then all bets are off. Right?
Yeah, but they would,
So if you're gonna have an established pathway, with people walking on it,
yeah,
a low angle is so much more environmentally friendly.
switchbacks.
Switchbacks, yeah. Choose your limit, say 6 to 10%,
Right.
something like that. Yeah.
Sure.
A skid road is much steeper and not inviting for people and it sounds like biking is the more polarizing issue. It's not necessarily that there's a trail, but maybe I'm
Well, because the link is to, that some people want is to a bike trail.
but the
That's
link
the
doesn't
other-
have to be a bike trail. The
Well,
link can be,
Sunshine is not a bike trail. It's a multi-use trail. I mean, the person that uses it most, Carol Jordan, walks it every day.
Okay.
Never on a bike. David doesn't use a bike on it.
Right.
I think part of the point is, I mean, part of it is bikes, right? You know, we've been talking about that, but part of it's also that maintaining the existing trails versus building new trails does very much change where the traffic would be routed in the forest, for better or for worse, right? So
Yeah.
right now, there is no connecting trail to Sip of Sunshine, whereas if a trail went in and would connect it, we would just need to consider those differences, right? You know, maybe there's less dispersed, use in one area, and then there's more focused, use in another area. And yeah, maybe we need to study that, or maybe we need to, kind of consider that. But ultimately, to get back to what you were asking, like, I'm not necessarily married to the idea that we have to ban all new types of uses in trail development up north of the vast trail. But I think to be able to move past that, we need to come up with an alternative, right? So like, that's why I was sort of proposing we just vote on this, because it's so contentious and we've talked about it for 2 hours and it's been talked about, meeting and meeting and meeting after meeting, we've talked about this so much. It's almost to just like clear the jam one way or the other. Like maybe most people say, no, this isn't reasonable. And then we move past it and we talk about, okay, well, what are we doing instead? So maybe that needs to happen. Maybe there should be a motion next meeting to talk about either that or something else, some set of guidelines that we can use to move forward with trail development.
8:15.
Could we let
We
Cecilia
have, so, yeah, we have Cecilia wants to address the current issue, and then we should move on to, if we can define what goes on the agenda next meeting, that would be really good.
Go ahead, Cecilia. You muted.
Yeah, Cecilia, we're calling on you to speak. If you unmute.
Maybe she's waving goodbye.
That could be. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I just think that this is part of why at the beginning of the meeting, I said, like, I don't think we're going to meet the deadline. Like, we've literally talked for 2 hours today and we've done almost nothing with the management plan. I think at this point, we might even have to tell the select board, like, we can't even reasonably get you something. Because right now, look at how much we're all disagreeing with the current text. If we send this to the select board, they're going to think that this represents everyone sitting at this table. And clearly it doesn't, right? Like different people have issues with a bunch of different sections. We have about 2 hours or less in our next meeting after all the other side business to basically get the rest of the stuff buttoned up to send a progress report. It's not even honest representation of what's happening here, right? That's not helpful for the select board to look at that and be like, okay, well, this is where they're heading with it. It's like, if we sent it right now, they would think that we're all in agreement that we shouldn't put trails over the, north of the vast trail, but that's obviously not the general consensus here.
Yeah,
So-
we'd have to tell them.
That's got to be our next meeting.
yeah.
Does Cecilia want to?
Oh, there's Cecilia. Sorry, Jim, hang on.
You're muted.
You're
Yeah.
muted.
Sorry, I'm either muted or invisible. Or both. I just want to go back when Jim and others were talking about using the existing skid trails. If we remember back, SC Associates, when the forest was first established and they were paid by the state with federal money to look at recreation on a bunch of forests, they looked at ours and said basically you definitely want trails created off of those skid trails. Those skid trails, those old logging roads should, be put to bed. They're not sustainable for recreational use. And they looked at that, from a professional perspective. That group is based in Colorado. They basically do recreational trails. And so they said very much what Jim was just saying about that. And I was kind of appalled actually that our town, he's not the planner, what is he?
Zoning administrator.
Thank you. The zoning administrator was like, oh, just use what's there. That's better than actually building a real engineered, constructed, well thought out trail system. And it's not. It's, at least in terms of erosion, and it's worse.
I think his argument was simply it would be compliance with the town ordinances, not that it would
Right,
be.
right. I know that, but I was just appalled that to be compliant
I think this
with
is-
ordinances would be to do worst practice as opposed to best practice. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'll be quiet because we were on to a whole different thing now about how what we're gonna do at the next meeting and what we want to bring to the select board.
Yeah, so on our agenda, we should address update from the town about the town plan and then nail topics for the next meeting and hope that we can identify how to get this.
I'll bring a mock
Done.
up for the bucket hats and tank tops.
So moving on to the agenda for the next meeting.
Yeah, but
We're getting
let's do
merch.
the.
I was hoping to make a motion.
Agenda, we've got the next thing is the update.
Oh, the updated.
Jim wants to-
Okay.
I was hoping to make a motion that we vote on whether we continue to include the demarcation. I would advocate that we eliminate that option.
So that
Right
would
now.
be, you're suggesting we make a motion next.
I make a motion, no, I make a motion that right now we vote to,
That's not how, when you have a motion, then everyone gets a couple minutes and then you get your response time. Like we literally do not have enough time in the meeting to make a proper motion and have people,
Sam, you're
wanna
not
follow
the
the
chair right now. He made a motion. It can be seconded. We can have a little discussion, but it's the chair that decides
You
it.
just discuss it for,
He can make
An
a
hour.
motion. He is allowed to make a motion.
Yeah.
It would have to be seconded. You have to allow for discussion before the chair calls the vote. So everybody you can make a motion outside of the chair having it on the agenda. You are allowed to do that. Someone would have to second it. Then you have to allow discussion before a chair calls the vote.
So we could do that at our next meeting and we can't do it today, is that?
We
is that
can,
what-
I'm not saying, I'm just telling you that's the proper
Well,
order. I'm not saying.
I think
what you do here.
the co-chairs would agree that with minus 5 minutes, we can't introduce a motion, but
What
we
else?
could certainly consider it
else?
for next meeting.
because we have to hit all the agenda items as a deal, right? So what's our next agenda?
It's the progress, that's the update from
we need-
about the town plan. Input to the town
Oh,
plan,
yeah, that's.
which is you and Sam.
That's like
If you have any updates.
nothing much.
no, nothing meaningful. I mean, we haven't really had
Not really.
anything else going on between us and Virginia, so.
Yeah.
I mean, Jim, I think if you want to make a motion, make,
I made the motion.
okay, can you say it again?
I make a motion that we either continue to use the demarcation as a potential option or strike it and agree that we need to seek alternate language.
You have to say one or the other.
Sorry, that we seek alternate language
Okay.
and cease to use the demarcation concept
So a motion,
for trail location and guidelines.
a motion not to avoid the demarcation.
And to seek alternate language for guiding trail locations. Or maybe recreational use location.
What are any other parts? Well,
So the motion is to stop
Could you-
using.
could
We're
you
not discussing it, we're.
Restate your motion because he's gonna have to restate it.
Yeah, I'm hoping,
a motion, yeah, tell me if this sounds good. A motion to avoid not set a demarcation line, maybe? Is that
Yes.
all right?
Yeah, use it to remove the demarcation.
A motion to remove. Well, it's not there yet, really. It's just hypothetical in there.
Yeah.
Not set a demarcation line and to seek alternative language for locating trails. Okay.
Can you read that back to me?
Sure.
That sounded great. The way you phrased it. Thank you for my.
Are you a pro?
A motion. The motion is for the committee to not set a demarcation line in the management plan, right? In the management plan, and to seek alternative language for locating trails in the ACF.
Alternative language to
For locating
for
trails
locating. Thanks.
in the ACF.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so second from Chase. Okay, now discussion. So we may go. Go ahead.
I have a
Cecile.
question. Yeah, because we're in discussion, right?
Yeah,
So, just for clarification, so if this would strike the mentioning of the line of the vast trails demarcation and recommend alternative language for placement of trails, could that language ultimately include a vast trail as a boundary for describing under where the different kinds of trails could be located? I'm just trying to figure that out. Maybe that's a dumb question, but does that mean we can never talk about that particular boundary again? Or can that be one of the factors that affects how trails are built?
it's a great question.
It's a good question because this came up last session in the context of dog use in the forest.
Yeah.
And that was one of the lines that's been talked about for our dogs allowed. So
How
does
about
that
we
mean
say,
now
how
dogs
about we
can be
agree
anywhere in the
to
forest?
amend the motion to say it's not the only to not set a demarcation line as the only guideline. Obviously, it can still be used as a descriptor of geography, right? But it's not the only.
Determinant.
Because it's not a limiting guideline.
So if you've amended the motion, you need to second it as well.
Sorry.
Well, before we amend it, can we discuss the current one?
Yeah, continue.
Hey, can I have a turn on this? So I think I totally, I mean, in spirit, I of course agree with you there. I think maybe what we're missing is a substitution, because I do very much appreciate the effort to move it forward into something that we can present to someone someday.
We just, could you read the proposed amended motion so we can just have a seconder and then discuss?
It might not matter, right? It's probably.
We may not amend just yet. We haven't amended just yet, but I don't think anyway, unless correct me, Jim, but I
No.
think we can wait a minute on the amendment.
I hear you.
I think what we want to probably do is take a little time in between this meeting and the next meeting. I don't want to use that as the demarcator for, especially with the language that you have here. I'm less worried about the trail being the demarcator as like the directives about what to do above and below. And I think if we get back to some of the proposals that we had a few months ago in the trails plan in terms of spatial, not just spatial, but also temporal stuff, we can probably come back with an alternative that I think will try to bridge the gap between where we are right now. And so I think what we need to do is just take a little time to come back with some bridge language that both accounts for what you're trying to achieve by making that demarcating line, which I get, and with the part that I think some of us are dissatisfied with, which is that it feels overly limiting and not adaptive, as Cecilia was mentioning earlier, in the ways that it could be. So, I mean, yes to the objection to the demarcation. I think maybe we can come back with an alternative proposal that would be more integrative if you want.
I agree with that. I think that we need more specifics, and per Robert's rules, I would like to make a motion to postpone this motion until next meeting. That is allowed within discussion of Robert's rules. You may make a motion to postpone a discussion. Right now, we are 3 minutes from when we were supposed to end our meeting. We still have other items on the agenda. This is why I was saying we shouldn't do this right now in the first place. I think Julian brings up some great points. I think that we need to have more background and some other options to discuss. Like unless we are all okay with staying for another half an hour or longer to discuss this and each go through, the points, because I would have a lot to say about this. If we're going to continue discussion, everyone gets a chance to talk before we vote the motion up or down. I think that's why we need to make time for it in a different meeting and not try to force it through in the last 10 minutes of
I would be
meeting.
very, if I'm allowed to second that, and I would second it, because I'm seeing this as a key topic for our next meeting that we can't address at this point.
So am I,
I would agree with.
do I need another motion
tabling
in
this
here?
until the next meeting.
Well, then, now there's a motion to postpone, and I guess
It's
a second. So it's debatable if we want to.
So with a postponed motion, does it get picked up right at the start of the next meeting? First thing?
After our
Things that don't
normal business, I think.
don't get to on the agenda by Robert's rules are supposed to move to the top of the next agenda. So if we don't talk
Okay.
about, let's just say, for example, the town plan, this meeting, it's supposed to move per the rules to the top of the next agenda. We never do that, but we're supposed to.
Yeah.
And a tabled agenda would be, sorry, would just be agendized in the next meeting. It doesn't, I don't believe a tabled agenda needs to be picked up at any given time, either in the next meeting or in a future meeting. It's tabled until it's picked up.
It does, I do believe it does need to be picked up at the next meeting, otherwise technically the motion is considered dead. Like it be based on Robert's rules, if you table a motion and then don't get to it the next meeting, it basically goes away. And then someone would have to, reintroduce the motion at another meeting.
Well, chairs, could I make a request that we pick it up first thing after the normal, like first
The
15 minutes?
boilerplate stuff, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think we've had a lot of
We
great
do that in good
discussion.
faith?
yeah, I think we've got consensus.
And I think that it sounds like some people are interested in writing some alternatives. I think we have a really, we've got good context to have a more robust discussion. So I think it deserves to be at the top of the next meeting. And
Feels like that would be a more constructive strategy, Julian's idea of let's think about an alternative and come at the conversation with that.
so do we want to just kill this motion
I
and
think
then?
we should kill this motion. Yes.
All right, so
I second that.
Is that a thing?
You can withdraw your.
Would that be simpler?
You can
I-
withdraw it.
Or withdraw the motion?
And then you request them to put consideration of a motion on the next agenda.
We're gonna discuss the next agenda, right? And we can talk about
We
it.
just
Yeah.
agreed
Yeah.
consensus wise. Okay.
So where do we stand? Could we vote on that now?
no, we
withdrawn.
withdrew it. So we'll talk about it next time.
Sorry.
We're all,
Trying to
we're
read the
just
room.
gonna put it at the top of the,
Okay,
Agenda,
yeah,
and get
okay,
it
we don't need to
right
vote on that.
and ideally though, with alternative language. right?
Yes.
Can you try to do that? Go ahead.
I have a request for the next agenda. Could you please put in the packet the original text of the recreation section?
You'll have to give me a date, because I don't know what you mean by original.
What was there before you replaced it with the appendix that Brad wrote for the recreation section? Whatever was there before that, couple months, 1 month back, whatever was there before that, I would like to have that in the packet as well. So one thing that did happen was, people were assigned a section to edit, possibly rewrite. So maybe you guys didn't catch, I'm not saying any blame at all, but
Yeah.
you guys were assigned the recreation section and didn't make any changes to it. Maybe you didn't intend to. But
I made edits.
you made some edits. Brad rewrote that section. So and that is now in the body of the.
I didn't think we were done with it. Are we done?
Management plan. So I just wanted people to be aware of that there was the text that was edited. And then there's the rewrite now called Recreation Appendix, which has been placed into the body of the management plan. So
So-
just making you aware of that before our discussion.
So for clarification, do we put it in the packet and expect people to read it, or do we put it in the packet and expect people to discuss it?
That's for the chairs to decide.
Okay,
I'm asking, I'm
That'll
requesting
be-
that it be put in.
that'll
the
be,
packet.
okay, me on right, Preston, we're gonna have to craft an agenda for next time. But you want the version that is probably the recreation section that was current maybe at the turn of the year, at the beginning of this year.
I think even before this meeting, it had some comments from Chase in it, but it has since been replaced with the recreation appendix as
Mhm.
per authored by Brad.
Yeah, and Chase's comment is still in there. I'd like to know exactly which version I'm gonna put in the packet, because it may have
The
been,
one that was labeled Chase and Jim at the top in yellow,
okay,
That's good.
because that was the original language, possibly with your comments on it. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just,
Copy.
I would just like everybody to be aware of.
We were so
well, if
disorganized in how we
we're putting
approached this.
additional material in the
It
packet,
could be a good comedy sketch.
if we're putting additional
Yeah.
material in the packet, I really urge people to study that material in the
Yeah.
packet
Okay.
before the meeting.
You
Come well
need to put
prepared.
it in the packet. Could you please put a note? I request that a note be put in the packet noting that the original language as commented on per Chase has been replaced by you with the recreation appendix as authored by Brad. I just
Okay.
would like people to be aware of that.
If,
So,
Yeah.
we've been talking about next meeting's agenda. Have we got enough on our plates for next meeting, or does anyone want to
Well, I
add
mean,
anything else?
we already kind of talked about it, but I don't think we necessarily put it on the agenda or agreed to talk about it. But like, I don't think we're going to get any reasonable management plan to the select board on June 2nd. They also need time to review it, after our next meeting so that they can, talk about it at the select board meeting. So I think we have to also address that next meeting. What are we doing in regards to this self-imposed deadline of getting the management plan to the select board by June? Because I just don't think it's a waste of everybody's time. It's not being very respectful of the select board's time. They have a lot of stuff they need to consider. Like, they're busy people. They meet twice a month. They have really long meetings. I think it's kind of disrespectful to just send like what we have that is not a reflection of what we're actually thinking, to force them to read, dozens of pages, and then for us to basically be like, well, but actually this isn't really it at all. I think we need to basically next meeting decide what we're going to tell the select board about, like, we don't have the management plan, but here's our paragraph progress report. Maybe we've figured out how to handle the trails thing that we just talked about. That's a big topic for discussion. I think if we don't have a management plan for them, what we can say is we finally figured out how to move forward with trails and conservation. We voted on and agreed on parameters for trail building. If we all vote on that and agree that we know how to build trails in the forest, that's fantastic. I think they will be ecstatic that we will have moved past this thing that has plagued us for years now.
Yeah,
So I think we need to talk about what we're going to tell us.
So the topic.
So
for the
that was
agenda
the cart and the horse conversation though, right?
Sorry,
As I recall, it was, we need to do the management plan before we can think about
Well-
trails. That was what you said.
But that part's already on the agenda for next meeting. I'm just saying that if we can get past that, I think that if we don't have something to give the select board, they will be okay with it because we are making progress. We're showing that we're making progress, right? We just need to address next meeting.
so my understanding is the topic for the agenda for our May meeting is to agree on what we're gonna submit to the select
Yes,
board.
whether that's the management plan or just a statement of our progress.
topic number 2.
As progress report.
So if we did, say, 90 minutes again on the management plan, right, alternatives and such.
That's what I thought.
And we have 15 minutes of regular business at the, the usual housekeeping at the beginning. 90 minutes for the management plan. That would bring us to 7:45. If we could go to 8:30 again,
We agreed already that we would do two, like,
8:30?
yeah, 8:30.
Okay, cool. So that would give us half an hour, or excuse me, 45 minutes to figure out what we
never voted on.
tell the select board. You know, sum up our progress to date.
We're getting side conversations
Yeah.
going again.
And
So
you guys, could you?
are we
just
ready
hold
to
off?
adjourn the meeting?
I think Ian and Wright will figure that out. Like, you're trying to plan out the agenda, but Ian and Wright are doing the next one, right? You were just this
Right,
for this one. So
correct.
they'll figure that out. We know what we need to talk about. Bulk of the time, talk about the management plan and the logjam situation, which we already discussed. And then we need to spend some amount of time to figure out what we're telling the select board. And those are the two big items we need to talk about
That
next week.
sounds good to me, anyway. Yep, it's okay. Listen.
I move to adjourn this meeting.
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye. I want to post.
Aye.